All right, welcome to first grade unit 3, properties of light. We're going to go ahead and dive through into this unit today. So this unit's all about light and how it travels, it passes through different materials, how it doesn't pass through other materials, how we need light to see, how the things have to be illuminated for us to be able to see them, and then finally how we communicate with light. And so we teach this through a lot of hands-on exploration. The first activity we do is a read aloud of the book Pout Pout Fish in the Big Big Dark. I don't have a copy with me here, but it's getting kids this idea of darkness and this being scared of the dark when we can't see things in the dark. And so to reinforce that concept, we use these light tubes, and these are something you'll need to make for your class. And this will be something you can make one per a set at a grade level, and then everybody just shares them throughout the day. You also make them, store them in your science kit, and then every year you pull them out. But it's basically a piece of round cardstock, rounded over and then taped, and then hot glued to a base. I used a little piece of cardboard. And way underneath this tube, you can't see inside because it's too dark, there's a little sticker. And so what kids do is they look down the tube, and at the bottom they can't see anything at the bottom. And so it teaches this concept of without light, we can't see. We have to have light to be able to see things. And so after looking and drawing what they see, they then use a flashlight. So any flashlight, whether it's your iPad or flashlights from your classroom, and then they use the flashlight to look down the tube, and they realize that they can actually see at the bottom, and then they draw that. So it's just this idea, teaching the concept that things have to be illuminated in order for them to be seen. We then go into a couple days of card sorts and explorations about things that give off light, like a firefly gives off its own light, compared to something else that just reflecting light. So I myself don't give off light. There has to be light in the room for me to see. So a lot of ideas of what produces light, what makes light, and then what doesn't. So that's a fun way for kids to teach that. We then explore with what can pass through light, and so we do some explorations with like plastic wrap and wax paper, like a clear plastic trash bags, any type of clear plastics, all the way to mirrors, to construction paper, and having kids try and figure out, does light pass through it, and if it does it make a shadow, and then how does that shadow look? And so there's a time to go out on a shadow walk to look for different shadows and take pictures of those shadows. We then introduce the idea of the concepts of transparent, which light can pass through it, translucent, which lets some light pass through, and then opaque, which are material that doesn't let any light pass through it. So after exploring that concept for several days, we then introduce the vocabulary and help students to make the connections with the concept. After that, we do some fun activities with shadow puppets, where kids are creating their own shadow puppets, and then they can retell a story they're currently reading, or kind of come up with their own story to explore shadow puppets. Like a simple white background works great to make those shadow puppets, a light shining forward, and then kids can either perform those, you could film them, you could make a really big deal out of it, how parents come in, you can take that any which way you want to, but it's just a fun extension for them. We then go into exploration with mirrors and how mirrors reflect light. And so you read this book called What Did They See? It's a great story about these little animals who find something and you don't know what it is. In the end, you realize that it's a mirror, and it shows there's a mirror in the book. There's also an alternative if you can't find your copies of this book. That's there. Then you explore with mirrors, and you have a lot of these little plastic mirrors. They are great for kids to explore properties of mirrors. So having light bounce off. There's these mirror challenges that students do where they're trying to do different tasks with mirrors. They're trying to write words backwards, show just different ways that a light reflects and bounces using a mirror. You also do this great read aloud called I See Myself by Vicky Cobb, and this is a stop and try it book. So there's things you can do with like a bouncy ball to show that light's bouncing just like a bouncy ball, but it explores the concepts of being able to see a reflection in the mirror. There's also a great page about you have to have light. Can you see yourself in the dark? And it talks about how in order to see, you've got to have light. So it just reinforces that concept of illumination, light, and dark. And then you finish that with a silly spoon activity where you use a metal spoon and kids look at themselves in a way, because of the way that, obviously the spoon changes how you look, and they kind of explore that idea. But there's a couple days on how we communicate with light. So kids look for different ways we communicate with light, such as like a lighthouse, using a light to light the beacons, things like ambulance or flashing lights, spotlights in the air, how those direct our attention to things, and even, and I think that may be it. And then we explore how animals use light. So we look at the book Fireflies, read this book Fireflies. There's a fun little video on a new invention called a firefly communicator, where kids can program different firefly flashers and they can try and communicate with fireflies. And then we move into the last final Picture Perfect unit, and it comes from the new Picture Perfect STEM book, and it uses two different texts. The first one is Jack Rabbit McCabe and the Electric Telegraph. It's like a tall tale, kind of reminds me of Paul Bunyan. It's a great story about a guy who races a telegraph. And then we read the book Communication Long Ago. And these are both talking about how communication has changed. Kids explore different ways we've communicated over time, and then they try to build a device that uses light to communicate. And in this one, they can also use light and sound. So they can even connect back to the previous unit. But things like a Morse code flash, using a flashlight code, you come up with a different way. It doesn't have to be light. It can be a combination of light and sound. But they're trying to convey a message. And that's kind of the end of that design challenge to wrap up the unit. So hopefully your kids enjoy exploring light. There's shadows everywhere. There's light everywhere. It's great to talk about the different ways that kids explore that. I think you also have some prisms in there and some magnifying hand lenses. Those are things you can use to extend to a couple of different lessons. But again, I know your kids will enjoy exploring with light.